Hello and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source software for the long haul. I am Eriol Fox, and with me is
Victory Brown.
And we have a fascinating guest. I can't wait to get into some of the work that you do at the Ethereum Foundation, but also in the hackerspace. We have Mario with us, and he works as protocol support for the Ethereum Foundation and also is part of the Bordel Hackerspace in Prague, he said.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about what you do as a protocol support and also the hackerspace that you're involved with.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you for the lovely intro. So yeah, I am part of the Ethereum Foundation for the past 5-6 years, and the last 5 years I've been in this protocol support team, which when I told it to my mom, she thought that I'm like picking up phones when people have problem with the protocol. But what we are doing is supporting the protocol development, helping to facilitate the evolution of the protocol. So Ethereum is something very different than it was just a couple of years ago, and completely different even further, right? We still do research and development to push it further. It's very decentralized in a way that there's a lot of diversity. Ethereum is implemented in like a dozen different clients, together with research, maybe 24 teams that need to coordinate, talk to each other, figure out what are the best improvements, how to make the protocol better, how to make it scalable for more people, how to make it more private, how to make it more secure. So the Ethereum protocol is always evolving and trying to become better than it was. And I help to facilitate it, I help to support it. So I maybe don't work directly on developing some specific client or some specific feature, but I help people who do this to do their work. So help to facilitate, for example, Ethereum Protocol Fellowship, which is a way to bring new core developers to the ecosystem. So this Ethereum core, the actual implementation, it's pretty complicated software. Ethereum is quite a big platform. It's pretty complex. It's pretty hard to learn all of these details that are going on there. So we are making this easier. We are helping people to come and contribute in our program, running an education and running some mentoring them directly to do this work. And then just helping with some research, with some testing for the upcoming upgrades. So right now we are shipping Fusaka, the next big upgrade of Ethereum is coming in December. After that, there is Glumsterdam. The current version of Ethereum is actually called Prague Vectra, because of the it's named after the Devcon names and stars, right? It's super confusing. So I'm helping the people to understand this basically, because we do a lot of important stuff, a lot of cool stuff. All the network runs on top of the platform, the infrastructure that we built. So I help to make that happen. And yeah, I come from various places, but Prague is one of my homes where in 2020, we started a hackerspace, which means like a community space of hackers, makers, builders who are somewhat crypto oriented, but not necessarily just that. It's more about creativity and embracing chaos. Specifically, Bordel means like a mess and chaos in Czech. So we invite people to just get messy and creative with us. We hope to use all kinds of tools, to share tools. If somebody wants to try a 3D printer or laser cutter or just a software hacking, or space for workshops, for education, for art, electronic art, and generally hacking of all kinds. And we used to have this space running for maybe 3.5 years. We had to move out, we rented the space, now we are looking for a new one. So what I'm doing in the hackerspace right now is just trying to put it together actually. So it's more of a community now that also came here to Buenos Aires, many of us, and trying to basically leverage maybe the global community to support the local efforts.
Like many open source people, lots of things on your plate,
so
right?
I didn't really elaborate on that, but the hackerspace, it's meant to be a community for free and open source software people. So people who, whether they work on this or they use it or they just embrace free and open source. So we, as I said, I mentioned a bunch of workshops, for example, how to install Linux, how to use alternative non-Google services, how to be more secure. And everything that we use internally, we built on completely free and open source tools. So whether it's hardware or software, we do it in a community way that you can learn how it works, and you can always do the same. You can always repeat our steps, right? So it's all about openness and collaboration. We have DJing there, for example, right? I mean, I'm not much of a DJ. I always do it at like 3 a.m. when I want to get people out. But any guest DJ that we have needs to use a free open source MixXX software to be able to play. So we had to turn a couple of people around who wouldn't do it, right? But those who can, those who are willing to use just the free tools, they will prevail. And Yeah, that's what we do, embrace. And that's also what I wanted to complain about the podcast, that you guys call it open source and not free and open source podcast, because for me, the free part is much more important than the open source part. The open source is sort of a pragmatic part of it. We say FOSS now, but all of it is coming from the Free Software Foundation, the GNU project, right? The community that created it based on values. The way that I see it, or the way that I talk about my community, or also like the reason why I work that I do, is because I care about the freedom, the liberty, right? I understand it's confusing, and that's why they don't like to say something is free, because it sounds like a free beer. But for me, that's the main part of it. The free part is about the actual freedoms that it gives you, the actual freedom of a user, the way that you can do with your own devices, with your own software, really what you want, because it's yours, right? But also the freedom, in a sense, for me, that it doesn't spy on you. It's not meant to be built to track your data and sell your data, but to actually provide utility. That is what I see in like the philosophical movement background of it. And the open source is more of a corporate term, actually, that talks about the pragmatic features. Oh, but you can get free contributors, and maybe it will be more secure and auditable and so on, which is true. But it's more of the pragmatic part of it, which I appreciate as much. But for me, it's about spreading, teaching these values and coming from the principles that we built on, yeah.
Personally, I completely agree with you. But to your point, in my personal journey in open source, so I've only been in open source for about 8 years, working as a designer and contributing as a designer. And it did take me probably, a good 3 years to really understand what the free part of free and open source actually meant in open source. When I did discover really what it meant and read about it, and where it was talked to people at FOSDEM and other places about what freedom actually means in open source software. But I do, as you say, I think it's something that a lot of people, it needs to warm up. Some people need to warm up to it, but I completely agree.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I totally see what you're saying. It also took me some time before I realized what the free part really means. That's why I say it's so important, because it's not a good brand. It's not really easy to understand when people say it, free, but as in Libre. And it's even more confusing, right? So that's why I'm talking about this. That's why in our community always push the free part, because we find that important to make it more digestible for everyone. Yeah.
Well, and that feeds into the topic of this podcast, which is about sustainability. And you said 3 different things that I wrote down notes for. You said scalable, secure, and new devs and fellowships. When I heard those 3 things when you were talking, I was like, well, those are critical aspects of making sure that open source, free and open source software is sustainable. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about what scalable, what security and secure open source means to you, and sustainability of open source? And then if you want to go into the onboarding new devs through the fellowships, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we have that much time, but the scalability is important. And actually, when we talk generally about FOSS, it can mean many different things, right? Especially in Ethereum, it's very critical because of the way that it's a blockchain, which is very hard to scale. And just to onboard new users, the only way to scale is just to basically invent new technology. It's really cutting-edge computer science work to enable more users to come to the network without overhauling the individual nodes. Because of the decentralization that we cannot sacrifice in blockchain, it's really hard to scale. But generally, it's important for any FOSS project. And I believe that if it reaches some critical scale, then it becomes sustainable, right? Then it's able to bring not just the users, but also the donations from the users, or maybe some payment, other sort of sustainable income, but people who depend on it, right? Or companies that use it and depend on it. So the scale is more about reaching this level where you become important enough that it's much easier to be sustainable. I think the hardest part is getting there. And again, the scalability, from technical terms, it can mean what runs on the computer, but also how easy it is to adopt and scale per users, right? If it's something that's hard to adopt, example would be installing this alternative Android operating system used to be hard, but now it's sort of a normie thing, because anybody can just plug it just plug a USB cable in the computer, click on a install, and it's done. You don't have to use any command line and so on. And it's scaled to many more users. So you said you work on UX. I think that's a big part of the scalability as well, being able to actually onboard the users and then being sustainable thanks to that. And security is just fundamental for me. Everything is about security. I'm a very security conscious person, and that's why I choose open source. the software, because everything else is security-based obscurity, basically. If I can read how it works, if somebody who is more knowledgeable than me read it, I have much more trust within the intelligence in the system and within the system itself. If it's completely open, and I can actually verify that there is, well, no backdoors, right? Like, this is probably the most fundamental thing. Like, literally every sort of proprietary app has either corporate or a government backdoor integrated, and the only way to make sure that it's not there is to use something open. And that's, again, the pragmatic sort of reason why to use open source. But that's why I believe many people or many critical missions, right, many critical usage are relying on these tools. And it's the whole stack, from firmware, some LibreBoot core boot in your machine, all the way to the browser you're using. So all of it today can be open, and therefore like give you the guarantees of security than nothing really else can. And the fellowship, it's a different topic there, but when I talk about the fellowship and I would bring in new core developers, again, that's part of the sustainability, right? And it turns out it's not easy. I mean, as much as the open software helps to make contributing easier, it also introduces different challenges. Today, with AI slop being just pushed into the repos, with people just overcoming the barrier to come to some repository and being able to do something productive, even with good documentation and so on, it's not always so easy. So the projects working on this, on documentation, on education, and I mean, in Ethereum, thankfully we have a funding and we have sort of system for doing this, where we can get people to contribute much bigger projects over a long-term time and support them on their journey. But even without this, I think every project needs to have, as good as the code is, the documentation needs to be good. And not even that, maybe I even used to say that documentation is not important if your code is good, right? If it's readable, which is another thing, being accessible to the developers. And there are many projects, many small projects, which just don't do this. And it's because it's one person who doesn't have the bandwidth for everything. And that's where the real community shines, where you can see something that, again, you depend on, something that you want to use, something that you find cool, and, well, it's missing the document, some parts of the documentation, you don't know how to run, you don't know how to fix something. So you try to do your thing, you try to understand, and then you document what you have actually done. So I think this is the amazing part, that, like, instead of like reverse engineering some proprietary devices and trying to document those, like, this is open book that you can read in and then just publish a summary. Yeah.
Thank you, Mario. You earlier mentioned something about corporate influence and community, and I wanted to know if you could talk more about what your views are on corporate involvement in free and open source software, especially when it comes to community building. Like, what are those effects and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's a double-edged sword, in the sense that, like, for a lot of software, it becomes so fundamental that many companies, many big companies start to rely on it. And there are three scenarios, I think. Either they don't care, they just abuse the free work by the open source developers, right? It's probably the worst case. And then they contribute, either contribute positively or they contribute in a way that they capture the software, right? I'm not sure what is a good example. No. For example, Valve might be a good example. Now they released the hardware recently. I just saw it like last week. And I think that they contribute not just the Proton, but now also to a translation layer between ARM and x86. And they just contributed to the project, they helped to grow it, to take it to the next level, right? And often what I see with these corporations is like sort of abusing their power on the other hand, bringing their policies, building their, it also depends on the license maybe, but often bringing, like overhauling the project so much that they become the owners and not the community anymore. And as the community becomes fully dependent on the corporate funding because it's already scaled, then it's just hard to get out of that. And then we see a bunch of these forks of some projects that used to be great. Now you have to, it's not good anymore. Now you need to install this fork of this thing that some one guy runs, right? So this happens with most of the big projects, right? Whether it's maybe some Linux distros which are pushing advertisements and spyware, whether it's, I don't know, as much as I love Firefox, like Mozilla putting money to everything but Firefox is very disappointing sometimes, and so on, right? So with the corporate interest, I wish that we have more neutral and more, for the open source projects to have some more rigid mechanism where they can't be so easily overtaken and influenced, but at the same time benefit from these donations and so on. Again, like another thing that came to my mind was like a fund that puts some small money into some donation box of a developer, and then they put, we support this project, right? Whatever, and they send $100 to like his GitHub donations. Instead of like, he has official documentation on how to do this if you're an institution, right? So instead of like going through the institutional way, they just don't even listen to or even follow the process of the project. So yeah, it's double-edged sword. And on one hand, I'm very happy that it's happening. There are many good organizations that realize this, that support their dependencies, or generally like are able to empower the communities instead of extracting. Yeah.
Listening to you talk, it's really interesting to hear the views about how corporate involvement, however you kind of want to describe that for yourself, listeners at home, can really affect and influence these small projects. And then also hearing you talk about the hackerspace that you're involved in and how it's really rooted in like playing with technology and it's empowering.
Yes.
So it's the difference between how I often feel when I hear about open source projects that are really struggling to maintain, sustain themselves, where it's like, gosh, if we could only get a big corporate sponsorship, it almost feels like sometimes they lose the sense of, well, technology is to be enjoyed, played with, and then ultimately owned in this way that you were describing earlier. Like that's the joy of investigating as a community in a new technology, a new protocol, a new whatever you're messing around with people that you like hanging out with. It almost feels like open source does have this real struggle between corporatizing, like seeming more corporate and proprietary, and then keeping its kind of hacker roots. I kind of wanted to give you, just as we're about to wrap up this podcast because we don't have much time, I want to hear more about what you were saying a little earlier before we started recording about the hackerspace doing funding processes through Ethereum.
So another thing about me is that I really refuse to use proprietary software and things that spy on me. So I also don't use any banks. I don't have any bank app and I don't sign any KYC, any stuff like that. Because today we have free and open source implementation of the monetary system in cryptocurrencies, in Bitcoin, in Ethereum, in Monero, and so on, each maybe for a different purpose. And on Ethereum, we have, well, DeFi or decentralized finance, which can give you some similar mechanism as banks in terms of loans, mortgages, right? But it doesn't really exist. There is not really, it exists, like you can take a loan using collateralized loan, but it's not really a mortgage. It's more meant for like maybe more short-term loans and more high-interest loans where you need to already have a lot of collateral. So we wanted to use something similar to be able to empower our community. And so what we did is we created contracts on Ethereum that we call crowdloaning. So you are familiar with crowdfunding, Indiegogo or whatever, where people, crowd supply, by the way, great open source hardware, crowd supply and similar, you pay somebody to build the product basically, right? You just give them the money and you sort of buy the product. In the crowd loaning, the idea is that you just loan us money. If you have some free liquidity, you can just give it to us and we will partially pay it back as a mortgage. So the way it works is like maybe you are able to donate $100, but maybe you are able to lend us much more, right? If you don't give up the liquidity forever, if you don't give up the funds forever and you just get them back, you loan us maybe $1,000. And in this example, if you loan us $1,000 for a small interest rate, because you're doing it out of what's a philanthropic reason, as a supporting a nonprofit, we give you even some interest rate, but it's much smaller than what you get on the open market. So compared to other protocols on Ethereum, you get maybe, let's say, as an example, 5% less. And 5% on $1,000 would be $50, right? So then you basically gave us donation of $50. So here's your crowd loaning t-shirt that you got in your tier, right? You have these different tiers, how you can support us. And so the idea there is basically utilize this community from all over the world to just lock some money on a contract, which is secured by collateral and which we have to repay based on the rules of the contract in 4 to 5 years. There is a grace period. First 6 months, we don't need to, but after 6 months, every month or every few months, we need to repay some percentage, some part of the loan up until it's all repaid. We can do it faster, of course, if we suddenly stumble upon enough money to do it, but otherwise we will slowly repay it in next 4 or 5 years. So basically getting a mortgage that allows us to buy a building, buy a basement. I don't, open source, I don't like Windows. I want Linux only. There are no Windows in the basement. It's a terrible joke. So basically, before we were renting, and It's not easy to do this in a rented building because we are very constrained by what you can do, and there's also a very small space. We want something bigger. We want something that really we can make our own, and we are kind of people like me that don't have any credit in the traditional system, and I don't want to deal with banks and stuff. I want to do it the free and open way. So we implemented it on Ethereum, where you can, because it's open, you can just read the contract. You can make sure that we don't try to pull any scam. There's no token involved, no speculation. We don't give you any tokens. We give you the reward that we say. So like if you donate, you get, or if you lend us something, you get membership in the space. So if you ever come to Prague, you are doing a digital nomading, or maybe you come for a conference. We are organizing Eat Prague, by the way. If you visit Prague for a few weeks or so, you can visit us and claim your membership and enjoy the benefits of, I don't know, you can do the 3D printing, you can attend events, you can just do the, I don't know, party with us or a workshop or something and enjoy the benefits of the space, or maybe claim some badge or some t-shirt that we also offer. So yeah, that's the idea. Basically empowering this local community using all free tools on Ethereum.
I love that. There's so many open source projects currently doing like donation crowdfunding drives that could really learn from what you just described. So, hey, projects that are doing individual donation drives, listen up. So we've come to the end. I would honestly could go for hours. I would love to hear more from you, Mario. Where can people like myself and others listening find you on the internet to hear more about what you're up to?
My handle is text me if you can. You can find me on GitHub /text me if you can. And otherwise, the Hackerspace website is Bordel, BORDEL.WTF, which is also the website that hosted the merge if some Ethereum people listen to. But yeah, Bordel WTF and the subdomain loan.bordelwtf is for the crowdloan page. And you can learn on the page, you can learn about all the stuff that we do and that we hope to do with the loan as well. And of course, like on Ethereum.org, on the blog of Ethereum, blog.ethereum.org, you can find updates when we do the fellowship. If you're interested in Ethereum development, in the current work on the protocol, if you are a developer, computer scientist, mathematician, there is so many interesting things that we work on in Ethereum. So please check out the updates from us as well. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you so much for having us. Is there any other projects that you would like to spotlight as we close out?
Oh yeah, thank you so much for asking that, because yes, there is many cool things that I use. And one project that I would highlight and you can donate to, you can use, is GrapheneOS, an operating system for your phone, which is probably the most secure and open and like very well thought out and also easy to run alternative to all the Google stuff, all the spying thing. So that's something that I very much appreciate and really depend on these days. It works too well. I'm this kind of person, when I saw this new Linux phone and my friends were making fun of me, like, oh, your phone works on 99%, so you need to get something which doesn't have half the features, right, to hack on. But I still use it and I love it. I need to maybe find something more janky, but yeah, Graphene is great. And yeah, that's it, yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for spending some time with us and telling us about all of your, honestly, very cool thoughts about the sustainability of open source. And with that, thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you so much. Yeah, awesome.
I want to say a huge thank you to the Ethereum Foundation and the scholarship program for allowing us to come out here to the Devconnect conference to speak to amazing builders in the ecosystem so that we can find out more about what sustainability means to them in the open source software space. Also, you can email us at podcast@sustainoss.org if you have any feedback or any ideas or any comments about the podcast that we recorded. You can also reach directly out to Richard, who is the person that typically looks after the Sustain podcast, on richard@sustainoss.org. Please do rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you're listening. That really helps us get new listeners and get higher ratings and keep doing what we're doing. You can follow us on social media and also share podcast episodes when we post them on Mastodon and LinkedIn. All you need to do is search for Sustain OSS on those platforms. We also have a forum if you want to talk to other open source software people that are interested in how we sustain our open source software ecosystem. You can find that over at discourse.sustainoss.org. You can find more episodes of the Sustain OSS podcast and also the show notes for these podcasts at podcast.sustainoss.org. And finally, if you like what we're doing, if you enjoyed these podcast episodes and you'd like more, please consider donating to the podcast to help us keep doing these podcasts for as long as we're able to. You can donate over at opencollective.com/sustainoss.